We are now going to take a very quick look at the difference between a primitive type variable and a reference type variable. This will come into play a lot in this class as well as a lot in 244 if you were to take that class as well. It's quite an important concept. A variable of primitive type holds the value of primitive type. So for example, an integer, int n equals 10, it would print 10, right? It holds the value of 10, it's nothing more, it's nothing less. Of course, we could change it to 11, 12, 5, whatever we want, but an integer with the value of n is 10. That's its value, that's all it is. A variable of reference type, such as an object or array, holds not the value itself, but a reference to where that value is. If you think of an object or a reference type variable, it's usually part of a data set, a collection of data, right? Like our dog objects, our animal objects, our rectangle objects. They weren't primitive data, they were a collection of variables that together made what a rectangle is a rectangle, or made a dog a dog. They're a collection of variables through reference objects. So let's go into this example here that I have called primitive versus reference. And we have the very thing we saw in the PowerPoint, apart from I'm using the Mickey Mouse example we created earlier in this playlist. If I were to print n, we get the expected output of 10, because n is 10. An int n is primitive data type. An integer is a primitive value. Doubles are primitive. Anything that shows up in blue generally is primitive. Chars are primitive. Strings are not. Strings are objects. If you remember back to 111 when I said strings are capitalized S and they're not blue, don't worry about that right now. But now we're kind of understanding why they're capitalized S and they're not blue. It's because a string is an object, just like a scanner is an object. So anything primitive, you will print that actual value. Anything not primitive, such as an object, like of Mickey Mouse, as we saw, will print the location of that object. And in this case for me, it's in my week 1 package, and this is the address of that file. So we can see that, and we learned how to combat this, right? We know that we could make a public string, toString, and we could just say Mickey. Oh, keep forgetting that we just have to return. And this would allow us to print the value, or not really value, it's still a reference to the object through toString. But we're not referencing the actual primitive value of the data itself because it's not primitive. It is a reference type variable because we are referencing a part of an object or an object itself. So that's the difference between primitive and reference type object variables. We will get more into this as we get further into the class and the next class.